Admiral Burke gave a webinar presentation at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, held in February 2021 regarding the U.S. Navy's presence and influence in the Atlantic and the Arctic Oceans. Admiral Burke presented a different perspective compared to the tensions in the INDO-PACOM region and the Pacific Ocean. Admiral Robert Burke, Commander USN, provides insight as to the U.S. Navy's presence in the Arctic and the Atlantic Oceans. In the pre-recorded webinar hosted by CSIS and presented solely by Admiral Burke, Burke said that he is responsible for 104 countries, 23% of the world's population, 14 million square miles of land, about 30% of the landmass of the Earth, and more than 20 million square nautical miles of ocean, and 67% of the Earth's coastline. Admiral Burke on NATO and U.S. naval coverage for Europe and the Atlantic. I can tell you that my theater here remains at the forefront of great power competition, which is the very core of our current national defense strategy. On NATO. President Biden has come out and contacted the Inspector General to reinforce U.S. commitment to NATO. It's an incredible, powerful and enduring alliance, and it's more relevant today. Today, 2021, NATO is 30 nations, united and dedicated to the ideals of democracy and freedom. Ultimately, our job is deterrence, so we stand ready to deter, but if necessary, we would defend, and I'm confident that we would win, tonight, if called upon. Admiral Burke stated that his approach for the United States Navy's European naval force coverage is to have a more tailorable, responsible, securable, flexible response options in the North and in the European theater of operations. Admiral Burke intends for the U.S. 6th Fleet to operate and patrol the Northern Seas and the U.S. 2nd Fleet to guard the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. He also stated that there are now 3 Joint Force Commanders, JTC, when there used to be just 2 commanders, a Northern JTC and ADM Burke is the Southern JTC. Now there is an Atlantic JTC, the 3rd. With 3 JTCs and 2 fleets, the U.S. Navy can apply pressure all around, even if it's at one point. The Mediterranean Sea region has its share of hotspots, Syria and Libya, regional instability, and the migrant flow from northern Africa. The U.S. Navy is seeing China increasingly present in the region with Chinese warships and investments. The Chinese are buying ports, such as one in Greece that used to be home port for a U.S. destroyer squadron, and China is also working to buy a port in Croatia that did maintenance and modernization work done on U.S. Navy warships. Today, the Chinese have a controlling interest in 12 European ports. So, are NATO countries going to be able to count on those ports for free trade, and if NATO has to defend Europe, will they allow us into those ports to refuel, resupply, do repairs, rearm? We don't know if we can count on that. It's a troubling pattern, and our European partners are increasingly aware and awakened to this potential threat, noted the Admiral. The Black Sea is increasingly seeing Russian naval activity with the annexation of Crimea, and Russia might deploy nuclear weapons in the region of Crimea. As a result, the deployment of U.S. Navy and NATO into the Black Sea resulted in 120 days for U.S. Navy ships operating in the Black Sea and 240 days if counting both U.S. and NATO ship presence. Even during the COVID pandemic, NATO and the U.S. Navy is pressing forward with presence. The Admiral said that Expeditionary Sea Base, ESB, for USS Herschel Woody Williams and Expeditionary Fast Transport UNSN Trenton, EPF-5, in the Mediterranean are new capabilities, and Admiral Burke thinks of them as heavy-duty trucks, able to haul cargo, vehicles, and be configured. ESB-4 did a very successful set of operations, last fall, off the west coast of Africa by Guinea in a French-led exercise called Grand African Nemo that brought 30 ships, 14 different allies and partner nations, and did a tremendous amount of training with U.S. Marines and naval integration. In February of 2021, ESB-4 is off of the coast of Somalia and working with Special Operations Forces to defeat al-Shabaab. Admiral Burke on the Arctic threat. What we do know though is that what happens in the Arctic has a global impact because the region really is at a crossroads of geopolitical, economic, and even security trends. There's economic potential because of the abundance of natural resources now with the ice melting, the promise of opening maritime routes. Russia, for example, is investing heavily to improve its economic sectors along the northern coast, and at the same time, they're militarizing the northern flank. China is in the Arctic as well, trying to expand their economic influence, and we see them positioning themselves to expand their military influence as well. To the U.S. Navy, the real military threat is Russia in the Arctic. Russia's militarization in the northern coast is the most concerning, said the admiral, who added that the Russians are putting Caliber cruise missiles on one icebreaker and that means that they can add them to more icebreakers. In addition, Russia is placing anti-ship cruise missiles, ASCMs, at choke points in the Arctic passages and parading 9K-720 as counter-short-range tactical ballistic missiles, TBMs, in Crimea and putting neighboring Baltic nations at risk. Russia is also weaponizing the Mediterranean by influencing conflicts in Syria and in Libya. China wants a Polar Silk Road, which is a clear extension of their Belt Road Initiative, said Burke. If Russia and China play by the international established rules and norms, that is fine, but will they? Pondered Burke to the viewing audience, and he added, "We're open, we're transparent, and we collaborate, and I think that is what distinguishes us from the Russians and the Chinese. Our shared values and goals, our openness and our collaborative spirit make our allies and partners want to work with us." Admiral Burke on the U.S. Navy and NATO's Arctic coverage in response. The Arctic is changing, which is why it's a discussion point and a critical juncture. The U.S. is an Arctic nation and the Navy has been up there for quite a while. I would just like to say, for the record, that they, China, are not an Arctic nation. They're 900 nautical miles from the Arctic Circle, although they have an Arctic policy document where they refer to themselves as a near-Arctic nation, but they are not. According to the Admiral, NATO views itself as having a defense and deterrence in NATO-related Arctic nations by providing a 360 defense. NATO's posture is to look for threats that may impact NATO. Clearly, NATO does not have a policy in the Arctic, but they clearly view that they have a role in the Arctic, and I think that's just fine. Of the 8 Arctic nations, 5 are NATO. The U.S. Navy is watching these trends and released a new Arctic blueprint in January 2021 that calls for modernizing the U.S. naval force to preserve its advantage at sea while continuing to enhance the Arctic presence and work with our allied partners to strengthen our relationships in the region. Burke noted that the U.S. Navy had a continuous presence of surface ships in the Arctic from May through November, and according to Admiral Mike Gilday, U.S. and Chief of Naval Operations, the current surface warships work just fine in the Arctic waters. "We got parts of the U.S. 6th Fleet in the Arctic nearly continuously since I took command last July, 2020, said Burke. And the U.S. Navy is learning from allies and partners on how to operate better in the Arctic. Icy water conditions. When asked if the U.S. Navy will armor their warships' hulls to better operate in the Arctic's icy waters, the Admiral pointed out that the Danish naval ships' hulls are not all ice-hardened, but the Danish Navy routinely operate all their ships in marginal ice because their captains are very skilled. Admiral Burke will leave icebreakers configuration, deployment, and future armament up to the force provider commander's decision and noted on the great partnership with the U.S. Coast Guard and cited that icebreaking is the U.S. Coast Guard's core business. The submarine threat. 2019 There was news source reports, open source reports, of 10 Russian submarines operating in the Arctic and the North Atlantic. And from there, they head into the Atlantic, and they exercise their ability to hold Europe and continental United States at risk with land attack cruise missiles, and some of those missiles, in the not-too-distant future, are going to be capable of hypersonic speeds. That's a real threat and that's something that we have to address. As a result, our submarines prowl the Arctic and we really dominate that area. "I spent time up there and submarines do well up there," said Admiral Burke. A viewer then asked if the U.S. Navy has enough submarines to provide coverage for both the Atlantic and the Arctic Oceans. Admiral Burke replied that the U.S. Navy Atlantic, unlike the Indo-PACOM region represented by the U.S. Navy's Pacific Ocean's 3rd and 7th Fleet, has some amazingly capable allies in the Atlantic with navies that operate and look similar to the U.S. Navy. These NATO navies operate with the U.S. Navy every day and respond, heck, yes, if called upon to assist. UK, and France to name two extremely reliable and capable partners. Canada. Norway. All contribute significantly to the theater of undersea warfare fight. Denmark is expanding their capabilities. Now almost every one of those nations that I've mentioned now have significant airborne maritime patrol reconnaissance aircraft, if not the P-8A version, closely resembling the P-8 capabilities. Many have BT versions similar to the P-8. Their surface combatants today are incredibly capable too. An example of this is the 12 US P-8A Poseidon aircraft based at Keflavik, Iceland in October 2020, and the Admiral said that the P-8s were very busy. Basing and response options. The U.S. Navy will have options and leverage one of the northern ports and as far south as the United Kingdom. Search and rescue, SAR, is one of those leveraged areas. When it comes to mustering an Arctic response, Admiral Burke said that it's sometimes the U.S. Navy and the United Kingdom, Royal Navy, or sometimes the U.S. Navy and Norway. The varying combinations and the types of ships deployed depend on the mission and what the navies can contribute at that time. Such collaboration strengthens partnerships, said the Admiral, and if the U.S. Navy can need to operate alone, the U.S. Navy will, but the U.S. Navy can also operate with NATO. There are a lot of different naval ship surface force combination options. We have pretty good options up there right now, but I'd like more options and more scope and more depth, so we're working that pretty hard. Such options might use destroyers and submarines based in Norway. Another option would be to use nuclear submarines from the United States. More is better when it comes to those logistics options. Perhaps the greatest advantage the U.S. Navy and NATO possess over peer nations is the sense of companionship, camaraderies, and partnerships. The Russians are largely going it alone and will work that to our advantage. Off.